Alright y'all, welcome back to the channel and to some more waterfowl patterning, and today we've got another old school setup to try out, and based on what we saw last week out of this particular ammunition, I'm really looking forward to seeing what kind of results we can get, especially considering that I have no idea when the last time this specific shotgun was actually used for anything or taken out on any kind of hunts or anything like that. I did just fire 2 test shots through it before I turned the camera on just to make sure everything is good and to get my point of aim, but other than that, I haven't seen the shotgun leave the safe in all of my lifetime. So who knows when or why it was taken out last. So I'm definitely looking forward to seeing what it's able to do. But as for the shotgun I've got out here today, I brought out this guy. This is a Stevens Model 311. It is the H series. It's a 12 gauge double barrel. It has 28-inch barrels with a mod full configuration. And to the best of my measurements, the actual constriction of these barrels isn't quite as drastically different as what I thought it might be. The left full choke barrel is right at a 697 constriction, and the right modified barrel is right at a 704.5 or so. So there is a little difference there, but not quite as drastic as some of these older shotguns can be. And as for the year on this specific one, I believe it's a 1974. It is a B77 serial number, and just by looking at it here, that would absolutely make sense that it is a roughly 1974 model. And I gotta be honest, it is very chunky, very blocky, not very, fancy design type of setup. So it might be a little bit of an ugly duckling in some ways, but if it can perform well, then it really doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things. So definitely a very interesting setup out here to try. And as for the ammunition we have to run through it, big thank you to Keith and the guys over at Salt Creek for sending some of these over. Not paid or sponsored or partnered or anything with them. They just make a good shell and wanted to see me try it out. But those are some of these. Salt Creek Vintage Waterfowl shells. Now, we don't need to shoot a vintage load through that 311, but it is an old school shotgun, so I figured we'll start here and see what these can do. But these ones in particular are their 12 gauge 2.5 inch 1 1/8 ounce of bismuth number 5s. I do have both 4s and 5s in this box, but for today's test we're going to be using the number 5 bismuth shells, and they're moving about 1300 feet per second. And as you guys can see, for the older shotguns out there, they are the 6100 psi loads, so they are the old school vintage low pressure, safe to shoot in those old classic shotguns loading. And these did very well last week, so I'm definitely curious to see what they can do through this 311 this week. So as for today's test, we're going to run everything the same as we always do with these waterfowl tests, but this is a double barrel, so I think we should do it justice and take a shot from each barrel so we can see the difference between the mod and the full choke barrels. So we'll take a shot from each barrel. It's going to be at 40 yards. I have the chronograph as well so we can get our velocity out of it, and we'll see what it can do. I'm definitely looking forward to seeing how it can actually pattern, especially compared to what we saw out of the Marlin Model 90 last week with those shells. I expect it to be pretty decent looking, but let's go over here and take these shots and just see what kind of results we're able to get. Alright, so let's take a peek at our chronograph numbers real quick. The boss claim is 1300, and our first shot through the left full choke barrel was 1317, so we're pretty well right on the money there. And our second shot through the right modified choke barrel gave us 1244, so a little bit under their claim. Either way, mid 1200s to right at about the 1300 mark is pretty reasonable, all things considered, for these shells. And I think it's pretty well right on compared to what we saw last week, considering we have a 28-inch barrel today instead of a 30-inch like the Model 90 was. So I think our velocities are looking just fine up here, but what kind of a pattern was it able to give us down at 40 yards? Let's go check it out and see what we got. Alright, so now we're down here at our 40-yard targets, and let's take a look and see what we got. We'll start off over here with the left full choke barrel pattern. Now, we were just a touch low on the paper, but we still absolutely have a dead duck here. There's multiple of them right through the chest there that would have definitely taken him down. And if we center that up just a touch better, as you can see, that is a heck of a swarm of pellets that he is not going to make it through. And I gotta say, it is a very nice and uniform, even pattern. There's no big gaps gaps or voids or weird strings or anything like that in there. There's nowhere on the bottom 2/3 of this target that duck could have flown into and gotten away from you. It's not quite as tight of a pattern as we saw through the Model 90 with the full choke last week, but this gun doesn't quite have the constriction that that one had either, so this absolutely makes sense. That is a very, very nice waterfowl pattern for small ducks or anything like that. That pattern right there is pretty much perfect, and at closer ranges it's going to give you a little bit more wiggle room than something that's really tight, but clearly out to 40 and 45 yards, that is still plenty good enough of a pattern to get it done. So definitely a very, very nice looking pattern through the full choke. So let's move over to the modified choke and take a look at what that one gave us. All right, now we're over here looking at the modified choke target. And with this one, we might have been just a touch low and maybe a touch off to the right, but we once again still absolutely have a dead duck there all day long. A good handful of them right through the chest cavity is going to get it done. And this one doesn't look terribly different to the full choke, but I think it has a lot to do with the constriction difference. There's really not a huge difference in constriction, with the full being right at a 697, 698, and this modified, I believe it was like 703, 704, something like that. So not a huge difference in constriction and not really a huge difference in pattern either. This one definitely is a little bit more broad once you get to the outside edges of the pattern compared to what the full choke was. The central core area, which I think is just down here under the duck's feet, looks pretty much the same. But as we get to the outer edges, you can see it definitely opens up just a little more around the edges than what that full choke gave us. But still, that is a 40 to 45 yard capable duck pattern all day long. That might give you just a touch more wiggle room and stuff in at closer ranges as well. So definitely not a terrible performance here whatsoever. I'm really liking how these shells are doing. They've easily been the best waterfowl shell that we've tested so far on the channel. There's no question about it. This 311 definitely held its own. You can't argue with this kind of a result. That's going to get it done all day long. And really, I don't think we can have any complaints about that kind of performance. Okay, here's the wads out of those shells, and I honestly couldn't tell you which one is from which barrel since they both pretty much landed in the same spot down here at about the 35 yard mark. And just like last week, they both look pretty well identical. Nothing weird at all. No snags, no tears, no pinholes, nothing stuck down in there. And judging by the patterns we saw, I think they both did their job perfectly fine. So looking good here, and definitely nothing too interesting to take note of. Alright y'all, well, what do you think about that kind of performance right there? Definitely a 40 to 45 yard pattern all day long. It's another one that you're probably going to wind up running out of energy with before you actually run out of pattern capability. And that's always what we like to see. If you can hold a nice consistent pattern out there at distance, that's going to make for a really good shell. And clearly, even though this is an old Stevens 311 that isn't necessarily a super desirable or fancy shotgun or anything like that, that doesn't need to have vintage shells run through it, I'd say this combination did pretty well. Definitely nothing to complain about. So once again, Salt Creek seems to have made a really good shell. So now I'm curious to see what they would do through something really modern, today's modern style combinations or chokes and stuff like that. I expect to see some good results there, but I definitely think that's something we ought to try. But as always, leave your thoughts down in the comments. Is that about what you expected to see? Were you a little surprised one way or the other? Have you tested any of these Salt Creek vintage waterfowl shells? Or do you have an old 311 and still hunt with it or anything like that? And maybe is there another shotgun or choke combo or something you might want to see some of these shells run through? Let me know all that down below. But with that being said, I've got some more testing to get done for you guys, so I'm going to get back to it. As always, we have the channel Instagram as well as the mailbox where you can send stuff if you'd like. All that information will be in the description if you're interested in it. But I'm going to get back to it, so I'll see y'all in the next one.